Cardinal Dominique Mathieu, the Archbishop of Tehran, Isfahan, has been evacuated to Rome following the emergency closure of the Italian embassy in Tehran, which serves as the site of both his residence and the diocesan cathedral. As military strikes intensify across the capital, the Belgian prelate was also forced to depart, leaving behind a dwindling community of just 2,000 Catholic faithful in a nation in the grips of conflict. With most foreigners now fleeing, only 4 religious sisters remain to care for the vulnerable. The church is calling for urgent prayers as the entire region faces an uncertain future. Professor of International Relations at NYU, Iranian-American scholar and a former political prisoner released as part of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, Kian Tajbakhsh is here to share his insight. Thank you so much for joining me. If we could first begin with Operation Epic Fury, it's underway. But before the mission started, how much of a threat was Iran to the United States?
Well, I think there's a short-term and a long-term context that viewers should keep front of mind. First of all, it's my experience as a former political prisoner and a democracy activist that was held and detained in Evin prison for over a year, including 8 months in solitary confinement under the IRGC. So I was up front and close and personal with the IRGC. So I got a sense of how committed they really are. The long-term consequence the long-term context, I think, is the fact that the Iranian regime sees itself to be at war with the United States and Israel since the inception of the Islamic Revolution in 1979. So this is not a problem. This is not an issue or conflict that started yesterday. There's a long, there's 47 years in which the Iranian regime says we feel the U.S. and Israel are an enemy, and we will fight them. That's the long-term consequence. The short-term context, which is important and brings us to today's conflict, is the fact that after October 7th, the Hamas attack on Israeli civilians, which was supported and funded by the Iranian regime, the rules of the game in the Middle East changed. The Iranian regime began to speak openly of changing its doctrine to go for a nuclear weapon because they felt it had been defenseless in the June war. And these two things together, I think, pushed the Western powers, United States and Israel, to have a sense of urgency that they would not wait for Iran to become a North Korea. And that's the short-term consequence, I think, that brought us to where we are today.
So with that sense of urgency, the U.S. and Israeli airstrikes have taken out more than 40 leaders in Iran, sunk over a dozen naval ships, and hit nuclear facilities. As you mentioned, you were held captive by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard for a year in Iran. Will these strikes impact the commitment of the IRGC members?
You know, currently, I don't think so. The ideological core of the regime, I estimate perhaps at 5 to 10% of the population, which is a large number of maybe 9 or 10 million people in Iran. They are ideologically committed, and there is also a large group whose livelihoods are directly dependent on the regime and the IRGC. So they're in it for the long haul. It's also a very entrenched regime. It has tentacles throughout the society. It knows how to govern and control a very large territory. And so for the moment, unless they are massively degraded, which I don't anticipate to be, to happen soon, in other words, in another month or so, I don't think the regime is going to capitulate or compromise. And they have recently come out just this morning. The police have said anyone in the street opposing the regime will be treated as an enemy combatant, and we will shoot to kill.
Now, there are some reports that the new Ayatollah has been injured. I don't know if you have any additional information on that, but also, some Iranians do support the regime, many others do not. So what is the sentiment on the ground among people today?
Well, I think amongst the group that support the regime, they are happy that a new supreme leader has been selected that represents continuity. both in the regime's external behavior and in their internal behavior. That is to say, the son of the former supreme leader will continue this antagonistic and aggressive policy against what they see as an illegitimate imperialist power, that is to say, the United States and Israel. And also, they are pleased that the regime will crack down on dissent within the society against anyone who wants to change the regime. So amongst that group, they, I think, are pleased that there is continuity in supreme leadership, although I suspect that they're wondering why they haven't heard from their new supreme leader, and it's possibly because he was injured in the Israeli strike. Amongst the 50% of the population who don't support the regime and who would like to live under a freer Iran, I think they are just hunkering down, they're sheltering in place, they're waiting for this military operation to end and see what happens. But I think there's a great uncertainty and fear amongst that part of the population.
Now, we have heard President Donald Trump saying that potentially this could be in the hands of the people. From your perspective, how does this all end?
Well, I think the most likely scenario is that the United States and Israel achieve their basic war objectives, which is to neutralize and to defang and to degrade the threats that Iran poses to Israel, to the United States assets in the region, and to the Arab countries that are United States partners in the region. I think the nuclear file, the question of enrichment, the proxies, the ballistic missiles, and eliminating the threat to the oil shipping in the Persian Gulf. These are the basic goals for both Israel and the United States. Whether it goes further than that towards any kind of regime change is very hard to tell. It is possible that in a month or so that the regime cracks under the assault that it's being experienced and creates a space for people to come out into the streets. But that would put us at a fork in the road where the regime would essentially threaten the people in the streets with another bloodbath, another massacre, as they did a month ago. And I don't know what the plan for the United States and Western powers would be at that point.
Now, religion plays a massive role in the regime and the government in Iran. What is life like for Christians now?
Well, Christians in Iran have, ever since the beginning of the 1979 revolution, has been dire. That is to say, even though there are government-sanctioned churches in various cities in Iran, I visited them, but they are highly surveyed. They are highly controlled. And any groups that move outside of the government-allowed premises of the church are immediately cracked down upon. Any groups, for example, I knew of people who were running what were called house churches in residences. They were often arrested and executed. So Christians in Iran face persecution. And I'm sure they're just trying to, ride out this military occupation, this military assault, and then see what comes out. Maybe something better, but I think they must be very worried.
Incredible that the church in its early days started out, as you mentioned, in some of these house ceremonies. And of course, now in 2026, it's happening again in the Middle East. Kian Tajbakhsh, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for inviting me.